Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just jump right into it. Have you been feeling an undeniable, almost palpable shift in the air lately? Well, if so, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're exploring a fascinating intersection that's literally defining the year 2026. We're going to look at exactly why 2026 feels so transformational, seamlessly blending the latest cultural and energetic forecasts with rigorous, decades-long academic research. It's a totally unique look at how seemingly entirely different spheres are all pointing to the exact same human phenomenon.
Let me ask you directly. Does this year feel a bit overwhelming? Maybe you're feeling kind of lost, or like you're standing right in front of a metaphorical fire hose of information and rapid change. According to both energetic forecasters and behavioral observers, this is absolutely not random. The sheer volume of what's coming at us right now is basically forcing a collective reevaluation of who we are and what we truly value.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the 2026 spiritual shift. Next, defining modern spiritual health, followed by spirituality versus organized religion. Then we'll look at spiritual health and healthcare, and finally, your 2026 spiritual reset.
Section 1. The 2026 Spiritual Shift. To really wrap our heads around the macro context of this year, we gotta start with some of the popular astrological and mystical forecasts. According to these cultural forecasts, a major energetic catalyst for 2026 is the Chinese New Year, ushering in the year of the fire horse. Now, what's really fascinating here is the historical context. The last time we saw a fire horse year, that was all the way back in 1966. If you think back to 1966, it was a time of massive cultural revolutions, civil rights movements, and the whole birth of the counterculture. The fire horse literally represents this massive burst of individuality, fierce and unpredictable momentum, and rapid, sometimes irreversible change. It's essentially a collective push toward higher consciousness, bursting right through old societal boundaries.
Adding fuel to that momentum is a rare astrological event taking place this year, known as the Aries Point Conjunction. Forecasters note that Saturn, which represents structure, time, and form, conjuncts with Neptune, which represents spirit, formlessness, and timelessness. Astrologers suggest this symbolizes a profound clash. It's basically the collision of old, rigid 3D structures with a brand new, formless spiritual momentum. It's described as a new evolutionary cycle where higher spiritual consciousness is beginning to impress itself onto structures that have existed for thousands of years.
Because of this massive collision between the old and the new, forecasters are using two really compelling metaphors to explain how society is processing it all. The first is the J-curve, the idea that things are going to dip and get a bit uncomfortable in the short term before ultimately rising way higher than they were before. And the second metaphor? Defragging. Just like an old, sluggish computer running a defragmentation program to reorganize scattered data, our collective consciousness is essentially defragging right now. We are clearing up polarized, scattered fragments to bring things back into a smoother, much more unified alignment.
Section 2. Defining modern spiritual health. Let's move to and see how this builds, because while energetic forecasters are calling this a cosmic reset, empirical science is actually hard at work defining this exact same spiritual yearning. To ground our explainer, we're pulling directly from a highly comprehensive scoping review published in the prominent peer-reviewed journal PLOS One. This study analyzed over 30 years of Canadian healthcare research, synthesizing findings from nearly 200 articles. It gives us a deeply textured, rigorous look at how we understand spiritual health in a modern, multicultural society.
So how does the academic community actually define spiritual health? Well, the research shows it's often expressed through what scholars call meaning-making. And no, this isn't necessarily about reciting scripture. It's conceptualized as a process of cognitive reappraisal. Basically, it's how people make sense of their experiences, adapt to chronic conditions, or engage in everyday self-care. It's also tied to sacramental recognition, which is finding deeper significance in everyday moments and connections with the self, others, nature, and the transcendent, totally independent of any specific religious language.
Section 3. Spirituality versus organized religion.
And this brilliantly illustrates a major theme that emerged from the PLOS One review, how modern society increasingly separates personal meaning-making from institutional dogma. On one side, we have spirituality, which the literature often describes as amorphous, highly personal, focused on meaning-making and transcendent. On the flip side, organized religion is described as structured, institutional, bound by dogma, and focused on collective worship. Now, the research does acknowledge these two definitely intertwine. Tons of people find their spirituality within a religious framework. However, from a public health perspective, there's a strong modern trend to separate them. Why? Because the language of institutional religion can sometimes act as a barrier. Today's society often favors everyday spirituality, finding that vital life force in self-care, autonomy, and personal emotionality.
Section 4. Spiritual health in healthcare.
We've defined the terms, but how are these concepts actually being applied in modern clinical settings to heal people? The PLAS 1 review clustered its findings around 50 primary health-related contexts where spiritual health is actively utilized across Canada. The sheer breadth of this is staggering. It's being integrated into palliative care, African-Caribbean community health, and spiritual care provision, but the largest concentrations of data focused heavily on youth and adolescent health, psychiatry, occupational therapy, and Indigenous communities.
Let's look at the specific outcomes in these key areas. For youth, higher perceptions of spiritual health, especially a connection to nature, are directly linked to lower psychological symptoms, less anxiety, and a reduced likelihood of substance use. In psychiatry, while harmful delusions are obviously a risk, healthy spiritual beliefs actually stabilize patients, offering them real hope and purpose, with some teaching programs drastically reducing depression severity. In occupational therapy, or OT, therapists are using narrative approaches to help patients spiritually enrich and reframe their life events to find purpose in their daily self-care. And for Indigenous communities, spirituality is absolutely central to traditional healing, forming a vital, decolonizing spiritual practice that revitalizes language, culture, and community well-being. This is literally hard science proving the efficacy of spiritual connection.
Section 5. Your 2026 Spiritual Reset. We've looked at the massive cosmic predictions and the rigorous clinical data. Now we're zooming all the way in. How do you practically navigate this overwhelming transition year on an individual level? First off, if we're defragging our lives, we have to look at the fragments holding us back. Forecasters use the acronym FRAG to describe the shadow side of this intense transition. Fear is our initial, superficial response to change. Reactivity is the automatic, knee-jerk defense mechanism. Anger happens when we realize we can't just fix things, causing further societal fragmentation. And grief is the deepest emotion, often buried right beneath the first three. The goal here is awareness. By recognizing these shadows, particularly by moving the C in reactive to the front, we can transform blind reactivity into intentional creativity.
So, the crucial point is how we actually do this. Based on guidance from the Economic Times on navigating 2026, here are 5 practical steps for your reset. 1. Accept the feeling lost right now isn't a failure. It's a totally necessary transition phase as you outgrow old expectations. 2. Build a daily practice. Don't overwhelm yourself. Just pick 10 minutes of journaling or breathing to build some inner stability. 3. Reconnect through silence. Cut the mental clutter of constant stimulation. Silence is where self-trust is rebuilt. 4. Realign your environment. Decluttering is basically a spiritual practice right now. Clear out items tied to past versions of yourself. And 5. Redefine success. Move away from external validation and start measuring your achievement through peace, emotional stability, and personal fulfillment.
We've seen how cosmic forecasts predict a shattering of old structures, and we've seen how clinical science validates the healing power of personal meaning-making. This year is demanding that we find clarity amidst all the chaos. So I want to leave you with this final thought. As the world defrags and undergoes this massive shift in 2026, what old identity, expectation, or fragment of fear are you finally ready to shed? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you navigate your own meaning-making journey this year.